continue talking about Age of Absolutism. Of course, I showed you a little short video on Louis XIV, and of course, Louis XIV was, the greatest, really, monarch of the France really ever had. Of course, also the longest reigning. It's one of these famous ways. The longest reigning monarch in European history. There's nobody else that's reigned longer than him, 72 years. I think the current monarch of the UK is getting close. I think she's like, I want to say 68 years. So if she had 4 more years, she might pass him up, which is a pretty long time. And you saw in the video, he came to the throne at a very young age, Louis XIV. He was only I think he was 4 years old when he came to power, September of 1638. Of course, he went by different nicknames. Of course, the Sun King is his common nickname, of course, that they called him. But he was called other names in Europe, such as Louis the Great. A lot of people called him the Grand Monarch or Great Monarch. So he was this absolute monarch that lived, predominantly in the, late 1600s, 17th century. He was a big influence on everybody. A lot of monarchs in Europe copied him, not just his style of rule, but the way he, built these lavish palaces in general. And so he was a model for other monarchs, and that's why he's such a big influence on the age of, absolutism overall. Of course, his policies, made France a major power in Europe. But it also got him in a lot of wars. He was a very warlike king. I probably won't go into the wars of Louis right now, but a lot of wars, of course, expanded, their empire. But in the end, it kind of bankrupted the country. And I think some people believe that the policies of Louis XIV kind of led down the road to what would be later the French Revolution. So he was a total absolutist. They didn't really have any assemblies. They had one called the Estates General. We'll be talking about more later, which was kind of like this advisory assembly to the kings of France, but it was disbanded under his father, Louis XIII. So he would reign 72 years. Now, when he first came in, he was heavily influenced. They talked about Jacques Bousset, of course, was a big influence on him. I think we mentioned about him before, Bousset or Bousset, I guess how they say it. And he was a big advocate of divine right of kings. He thought that the king was, the God's representative on earth, like it says, and was entitled to unquestioned obedience. So that's pretty much the view of, divine right. And a lot of these ideas came from the Bible, like I told you. They saw kings like King David, King Solomon being, kind of like absolute monarchs. And so that's their whole envision of what, the monarch should be, like Louis XIV and other rulers that come later. Now, his reign was very young. Like I said, he was only 4 years old when his father died, Louis XIII. And so there was a regent that controlled the country, which the video talked about, which was Jules Mazarin. Mazarin was a Catholic cardinal and minister that was under Louis XIV. He was handpicked pretty much by Cardinal Richelieu, who had been the previous minister under Louis XIII. He controlled the country, you can see, for quite a few years, from 1643 to 1661. Mazarin was in power. Mazarin was hated by the nobility. They didn't really trust him because of his influence with the Catholic Church in Italy. And so a lot of the nobility called him a nickname, which was, they called him the Italian thief, because they thought he was trying to steal control of the country with, I guess, influence from the Catholic Church in Italy. Also, another thing, too, about Jules Mazarin. I don't know if you know much about Louis XIV's mother. Her name was Queen Anne, who was the wife of Louis XIII. And supposedly there was some kind of relationship between Mazarin and Queen Anne, where they were secret lovers, or I think there's even a theory that they may have married at one point. So the nobility also had another nickname for Mazarin, which was, they called him the custodian of the queen's bed. So, yeah, the video mentioned about the Fronde. The Fronde was like this civil war which lasted just a few years, 3 or 4 years in France. May have lasted longer than that, but it was mostly a war between the French nobility and the French crown, controlled by Louis XIV and Mazarin. The nobility wanted more power, which Louis XIII and Richelieu had been taken away. It was really their last, rebellion, I guess, against that. And so they think the Fronde over time led to, absolutism in France. Because after Louis comes in, when he becomes sole ruler, 1661, France, becomes this absolute state, pretty much micromanaged by his policies. The Fronde supposedly is a French word, which means the sling or something like that, because of supposedly rocks being slung or thrown at Mazarin or his supporters, and that's supposedly where the name comes from. Of course, that motto that they talked about in the video, "L'État c'est moi." Of course, we've heard of that. Of course, it has different translations. The state, it is me. It's usually the translation. Of course, the other way they say it too is "I am the state." And of course, that motto is actually kind of like an epitome of like what absolutism was. Where I am the state. I'm the ruler. You're nobody. Peons. So it's like he's saying that basically I'm the reason why France is great. And the state of craft is pretty much, controlled by one person. So, that his actual real motto was not "I am the state." It's, of course, attributed to him, but he had an actual motto that he liked better, which was "I am the greatest." Just think what Muhammad Ali used to say or something like that, the famous boxer. Yeah. So, but yeah, his biggest thing, of course, that he would build, would be eventually his famous chateau. Of course, you've heard of, which is Versailles, of course, called the Palace of Versailles, which they started construction on it in the 1660s. Versailles would be the central court of France of 3 monarchs: Louis XIV, Louis XV, and Louis XVI. I think from 1682 to 1789, so about a period of 107 years. It's pretty much like the capital and central court of the Bourbon dynasty. Who built it? There's different people that built it. They talk about Louis Laveau. Louis Laveau was the main architect that began designing it in the 1660s. He built like the facade of Versailles. So I think it took up to like 40,000 workers or more to construct Versailles. They used kind of like this Baroque style architecture, which is influenced by a lot of Italian architecture that kind of went back to the Renaissance. There was also André Le Notre was another. He was like a landscape architecture. Yeah, landscape architect. And he is the one that designed a lot of the parks, the gardens, which is like about 250 acres of gardens and parks that were kind of part of the whole complex. That's actually Versailles. It's about 11 miles southwest of Paris is about where it was built originally. They also had Charles Le Brun. I don't know if you heard of him, but Charles Le Brun was a famous French artist, and he's the one that painted a lot of the ceilings and other areas of the palace. And Louis XIV thought he was like one of France's greatest artists, like in the 1600s and all that. Of course, it includes like a fabulous courtyard, and there's like a statue of, Louis XIV that's kind of in the center between all the different wings of the state that are there. And yeah, Mansart, they think, he's another guy that's also very famous. Jules Mansart, of course, is very well known, of course, for building what they call the Hall of Mirrors, and the Hall of Mirrors became the central gallery that's kind of, I guess, joins the two wings. Central gallery of, which was really the most famous and largest room of Versailles. And that was built a little later, more towards the end of the construction of the palace, which I think the main construction of the palace was completed by the 1680s. But there's also been some other chateaus that have been added later by Louis XV and Louis XVI, like the Petit Trianon and the Grand Trianon. Those were later added later, which were chateaus that are also there as well. The Hall of Mirrors, of course, is famous for all the mirrors that are cladded on one side of the hall. You can see, it's the largest room in the palace. There's actually 226 rooms at Versailles. This one is the biggest sized room. And I don't know if I got this. It's about 246 feet long by 33 feet wide. Each side has 17 clad mirrors or towered mirrors on each side. I think each mirror has about 350 pieces of glass on it. Glass was real expensive in the 1600s, which, if you know about it, the French developed a pretty big glass industry in that time. And it looks out into like the gardens and parks, which are on this side. And I guess the mirrors help to light up the room, like during natural lighting in the room. And then you can see it also had like a lot of chandeliers that help light up the room during the day or night as well. So you can see how showy these palaces were. So a lot of money was put into it, a lot of gold, marble, a lot of tapestries, which kind of paint the history of France, but also a lot of, Louis was big in a lot of Greek Roman mythology, which of course was painted on a lot of the ceilings as well. Believe it or not, when they had a lot of wars, they had to melt down a lot of this stuff you're looking at here, like gold furniture and stuff. Yeah, because they started running out of money, so they started melting stuff down, supposedly anyway. The Hall of Mirrors is famous for different things. It was like a grand gallery. They used it for balls, weddings. There was even cases where women would come and give birth there, believe it or not. And of course, the most famous thing the Hall of Mirrors is known for, if you know about it, was there's been a couple, famous peace treaties signed there, with the most famous being signed, which ended World War I, which was the Treaty of Versailles in 1919. Supposedly the German Empire in 1871 was formed in that same Hall of Mirrors after they defeated the French in the Franco-Prussian War. So that hall has had a lot of famous things happen, and Louis probably used it to to meet ambassadors and dignitaries of other countries, and I guess it, like it said, it influenced people, and people were kind of in awe of like the palace, etc. That's like where the main entrance. There was actually a gate here, so that ran right here that was in front. But during the French Revolution, they tore it down. And so 1789, when the French Revolution broke out, French stormed it, and that it was no longer like a residence after that. What else? Here's some statistics about Versailles. You don't really have to know about this, but this is all the stuff that kind of goes into it. So yeah, the total area, like actually it's more like 2,000 acres. Looks like it. No, the palace I think is 250, but yeah, it's got a lot of roads around it, a lot of trees, a lot of flowers. You can see there's a grand canal running to it as well. A lot of fountains. That's the thing. They had to build all these like engines to pump water to run the fountains as examples. 700 rooms. I think later expanded, of course. But what was that one thing that was famous, of course, about it? 6,000 paintings you can see, lots of engravings and drawings as well. A lot of sculptures made of gold, marble, etc. A lot of furniture, of course, went into it also as well. A lot of flowers. That's one thing about Versailles, which is real famous. All the fat flowers and trees that are there. I think they had a menagerie as well, which was like showcasing like wild animals from all over the place as well. Most favorite type of flower you find at Versailles, and it was also Louis XIV's favorite flower, was a tulip. They have like an orangery, I think, there as well, growing oranges and stuff like that. So a lot of money went into that, which I think he regretted later about this. He spent so much lavishly, which it may have helped to kind of bankrupt the state, of course, later. So yeah, we talked about that right there. Now they have this guy named Jean Baptiste Colbert, who he's part of the reason why France was able to spend so much money on this lavish court and palace complex that's there. And he was like his chief minister. If you know about Louis didn't really have a first, really like a chief minister, like say like Richelieu. It says chief minister, but it was never official. He was like one of his first ministers of state that he had. His real title was Controller General of Finances or something like that, or just Chief Minister of Finance is fine as well. Colbert was an economic genius. They call a lot of his mercantilism policies Colbertism. You may have heard of that. And what he wanted to do, Colbert, he wanted to develop like worldwide colonies, like all over the world, where they could get natural resources, bring them back to France, and then try to sell more goods than buy, so they can make like a lot of gold. And that's kind of how mercantilism works, basically. So you have to have all these, imperial colonies that they have, which I think they used to call it old imperialism, I think was the term they used. And you can see they were influenced by the Spanish and Portuguese, who kind of were developing mercantilism with their empires as well. Like Spain was in, the Americas, Portugal was in Brazil, Africa, and Asia. And so they expanded as well. Like France, which they had already been developing, going back to like Louis XIII, they expanded New France and Canada. And one thing he did in France was he expanded the fur trade. The fur trade was the big thing, in North America. They had India was expanded as a colony. Why was India important? India was important because they got coffee, black pepper, tea, cotton, spices, things like that. And don't forget about the Caribbean. The Caribbean had well, they call it Haiti now, but the French called it Saint Domingue, if you know about that, Haiti. And of course, it's down there. They had sugar from sugarcane, and that's the other big thing they had down there. So yeah, these are some of the main policies, that they tried to do with mercantile, favorable balance of trade, where they controlled most of the trade and sell most of the goods to make most of the money, keep gold and silver in the country, tariffs on imports. Yeah, they want to put tariffs on foreign countries, high tariffs, so that they could have their exports instead that make most of the money, which you see here. They did subsidize a lot of industries, which is true, like especially the glass industry was something Colbert, of course, was known for developing in France. They had their own. So I think at the time, Italy controlled a lot of the production of glass, and Colbert was kind of instrumental in developing like a glass industry in France and all that. Colbert is also important. He expanded the French Navy. And I don't know if you know about Colbert. Colbert is supposedly the father of what they call the French merchant marine, like dealing with sailing ships that deal with commerce, etc. He expanded he did all kinds of things. Colbert expanded their transportation system throughout the country. So he was really a great influence on France's economy. For a period of around 20 years, in the 1660s, 1680s, Colbert was the mastermind behind France's economy. Then after he died, it just went downhill after that. So he was kind of a genius, they say, Then, of course, the thing that they always talk about, which I think was probably a worse domestic mistake than I know that Louis did, was he revoked the Edict of Nantes. You may have heard about this, which the actual was part of an edict he issued, which I don't have up there. Oh, hey, what's going on? Good morning. How's it going? So say good morning there. But they had I'll put it up here, but it's called the Edict of Fontainebleau. I could spell it right. I think was issued in October. I'll give you the date. It was October 18th, 1685 is the date. I'll put it on here for you. And I don't know if you know about Fontainebleau. Fontainebleau is one of I may have spelled that wrong, but that was one of his other palaces. He had a bunch of palaces: Louvre, Fontainebleau, of course, Versailles. At that palace, he issued that edict, which basically revoked what his grandfather had done, Henry IV, who had given religious freedom, 1698, of course, to the French Calvinists. And so thousands of them were forced to leave the country in droves, the 1680s and I guess in 90s. And basically they closed down all their churches, closed down all their schools. I think Louis remarked later that after he did all that, that there are very few Protestants left in the country, like a few thousand. I don't know if it was that many, but those that didn't want to leave were forced to convert. They had to become Catholic. Basically, or be persecuted, thrown in jail or prison or whatever. So a lot of them fled to countries that were friendly, to them, like Protestant countries. I know a lot of them went to the Netherlands, the Dutch Republic, and it was one area, Prussia, also America. A lot of them went to America, fled there, believe it or not, and kind of had an influence on the United States on down the line. So the only bad thing about him revoking the Edict of Nantes in 1685 was they think it caused kind of a brain drain later, which hurt their economy because a lot of these people that left were kind of skilled type workers, kind of like upper middle class type, and it really hurt their economy. So it's something that he kind of probably regretted later. But the reason why he did it was because Louis had this idea to have one country, one king, one religion. It's pretty much his view. What was his quote? He said he wanted one France, one king, one religion. So he didn't want the Huguenots to have any religious rights or political rights, which they had some of in the country. So this is all part of his whole micromanagement of the country and trying to, be an absolutist. Which of course he was. They think, it does. Of course, French decline in the late 19th century. France got into a lot of wars. I'm not really going to go into all the wars he got, but he got into a lot of wars with Germany on his border to the east, the Holy Roman Empire. And he fought, we'll get to it later, but he fights against the Emperor Leopold I. He's the other big ruler in Europe at the time. Those are two like rivals. They were actually related somehow. I thought they were cousins or something like that. They were at war against each other in multiple wars. And then, of course, I think England's kind of a rising power. That's another power that's kind of becomes kind of a conflict with France as well. They get involved with them, as well. And then, of course, the other problem he had was he had a lack of heirs. Like all of his heirs started dying off because, Louis lived so long. Like I say, reigned 72 years. He died when he was 77. And so all of his sons were dead. All of his grandsons died. And so the throne eventually went to his great-grandson, who was, I think, about 5 years old when he came to power, which is Louis XV. And actually left a letter behind for Louis XV saying, hey, don't do all the stuff I did, all the bad stuff, big, all these wars and spending lavishly. When he said, my child, do not imitate me in the taste I have had for building for war. Try, on the contrary, to be at peace with your neighbors. Try to comfort your people, which unhappily I have not done. So he felt like he had failed as a ruler in the end because he had spent so lavishly and fought all these wars and all of that. But of course, the rulers that come in later, Louis XV, continue with the wars and all that, and continue absolutism, which in a sense is the whole reason later for why you've got, the French Revolution that occurs. But we'll get more into that later about that. Yeah, I haven't really reviewed much. Let me go ahead and do some reviewing, I guess, of course, on the Age of Absolute. I need to get in, of course, into that and talk about that. I'll review a little bit, and then what I'll do is I'll start talking about the rise of the Habsburg Empire. I'll talk a few minutes today about that. It's probably going to take a couple of days until like next week to finish up. Usually Age of Absolutism takes a while. So what is absolutism? What main centuries does absolutism dominate continental Europe? Absolutism was, or Age of Absolutism was a period in early modern Europe where you've got these centralized monarchs that have total autocratic power without any constitution or constitutional monarchy. And monarchs like Louis XIV were the epitome of it. And mostly it peaks really around Louis XIV's reign from about the 17th to the 18th centuries. But it does go back to like you can go back to the 16th century as well. What are some influences of it? Influences were obviously biblical reasons, like the Bible and the Catholic Church had a lot to do about it. That was one. Of course, divine right of kings, which was a political theory, was a big influence on it. Also talking about the great chain of being was another thing that was an influence as well. The great chain of being was kind of an influence that influenced divine right as well. What famous people and works influenced it? Besides the Bible, I told you about that book by Thomas Hobbes called Leviathan. It was a big book that influenced people. I think also the Prince, Machiavellian politics, maybe kind of influenced it also as well. And also they had that guy, Jacques Bousset, we told you about. He was kind of influential as well. Spain, France, also Austria, Prussia, Russia. Those were the major powers that were considered absolutist type states in Europe, the most famous ones. I think Sweden was also for a while absolutist as well. Who was the founder of the Bourbon dynasty? That was King Henry IV, or Henry of Navarre. He came to power in the late 16th century and ruled till 1598. The Bourbons would rule till 1830, France. Why was Cardinal Richelieu important at the beginnings of the French absolutism? They think Richelieu was the one that was considered the first major absolutist under Louis XIII. He pretty much developed the policies for that. He was basically Louis XIII's chief minister. He controlled the actual state. He actually ran it itself. Louis XIII was the real guy in power, but Richelieu was the one that pretty much controlled all the policies in the government. Partisan policy that he did, one thing he did, he centralized the government around the monarch, the king, Louis XIII. He also supported policies that were in favor of the Protestant states that opposed the Habsburg Empire in the 30 Years' War. Louis XIII, of course, wanted to weaken the Habsburg Empire to make the French Empire more powerful, which happened. Also expanded trade in their colonies, especially New France, which was starting to kind of develop at that time. We talked about Louis XIV. There's all these we just already did, but Louis XIV was of course the greatest king of France, third Bourbon king, of course famous as the absolutist king of France. Why was he considered the greatest absolutist at the time? Because of his policies and the fact that he was a model for other heads of state that were in Europe at the time, and so a lot of absolute rulers copied him, not just his statecraft and how he ruled the state, but also his showiness, the way they dress, way they built palaces and courts, things like that. And I'll tell you all the nicknames. Sun King's the most famous name, but I told you he was called sometimes Louis the Great, also the Grand Monarch or Great Monarch. His motto was L'État c'est moi. The state is me, or I am the state. Who controlled his regency early on? It was controlled by Cardinal Jules Mazarin, who had been appointed by Cardinal Richelieu, and also controlled by her mother, Louis's mother, which was Queen Anne, who was the wife of Louis XIII. What palace became the center of his court and capital of France? Of course, that was, of course, the Palace of Versailles, located outside of Paris. That was pretty much the court and capital of pretty much of the state until the French Revolution. What room dominated it? That was, of course, what is Hall of Mirrors. It was designed by Jules Mansart, famous architect in France. Of course, Louis XIV's main minister, we talked about finance, was Jean Baptiste Colbert. Colbert was, of course, instrumental in their economy. And what colonies dominated the mercantile economy of France at that time? Of course, that was New France, which is Canada. You had the fur trade. India had spices, pepper, cotton, and other tea and other things that came from the east. Of course, Haiti, which is called Saint Domingue, of course, had like sugar. And the primary economy of New France was fur trade, of course. Why did Louis revoke the Edict of Nantes? What was that about and the outcome? That was where he revoked the religious freedoms of French Calvinists, Huguenots in the country, forced them to flee the country. And 100,000 or more left. It might have been more than that. Might have been 200,000. They're not sure. That led to eventually, they think maybe an economic brain drain that hurt their economy and influenced other countries outside of France, which it, of course, would later. Right, moving on, let's also talk about, of course, want to get into Central Europe, kind of move from Western Europe to Central Europe. Although we'll kind of go back and talk about Spain in Western Europe as well. Of course, in Central Europe, you had these two powers that would emerge later, which would be Austria and Prussia. Austria's in southern Germany, and yet Prussia in northern Germany. They kind of break away from the remnants or declining Holy Roman Empire, which starts declining after the 30 Years' War, like around 1648. And you've got these two royal dynasties that kind of emerge afterwards, which are called the Hohenzollern dynasty. Hohenzollern dynasty. And that one was a dynasty that was kind of a fairly new one that developed in northern Germany, and they were based around Prussia, which included like two areas, one called Brandenburg, which was around where Berlin is, and another state called Prussia, East Prussia, which was around a city called, or capital, that was called Königsberg. And then you had the other one called Habsburg or Habsburg. You spell the B or a P, usually the P sound, Haps, like a P sound. And Habsburg Empire was really old. They went back to the Middle Ages, like around the 11th century. They were kind of Catholic, and these guys were Protestant, by the way. And but they were a really old Catholic type dynasty that went back to southern Germany. But they controlled also like Spain, Portugal later, at one point, parts of Italy. So they had a vast empire. That's one thing about the Habsburg Empire, or empires, more than one of them. They controlled vast territories, which a lot of those areas you're looking at in color, like not here, but down here, like Spain right here, around Austria-Hungary, Bohemia, northern Italy, this area like the Netherlands, Also, we'll get to it later, the New World as well. So they had like a vast empire that they had overall. Now, I'll talk about the Habsburgs. The Habsburgs were split into two branches. They had the senior branch, which was Habsburg Spain or Habsburg Empire Spain. It's called different names. The Spanish Empire. They never really had an official name of it. I think a lot of people call it Habsburg Spain. It's the common name, but it's the senior branch. And it went back to Charles V, who we've talked about before. So you got Emperor Charles V. They didn't have that many rulers either. They had, I think it's like a total of, I want to say, maybe 6 rulers that were part of the Habsburg Spain, which go up to like 1700. So I think it starts around I forget exactly when it starts. I guess 1519 is a good starting date. And it goes up to about 1700. So almost 200 years that the Habsburgs rule over was Spain and its empire. And Charles V was a grandson of Ferdinand and Isabella. He was related through, I don't know if you ever heard of her, but a woman named Joanna. I think I've got that here somewhere. Joanna of Castile, who was called sometimes Joanna the Mad. I don't know if you've heard of her, but Joanna of Castile was a daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella. They call her Joanna the Mad because she went crazy. And she married this guy named Philip I, so it's called Philip the Handsome, who was a Habsburg. And so hence they started calling the dynasty Habsburg when Charles came in. He became the ruler. And Charles was known as also, he was called Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor. But if you know about it, he was also called King Charles I as well. But they didn't call him Charles. If you know, in Spain, they called him Carlos. And, Carlos is the Spanish name for Charles. So Charles V is known for a lot of things. He was, of course, the greatest ruler, really, in Europe in the 1500s. He had such a vast territory that he controlled. See, all that area in green you're looking at, which was the Habsburg Empire at the time of the 1500s, was just massive in size. I think the size of his empire was like 1.5 million square miles, or if you want the kilometers, kilometers, I meant 4 million square kilometers. So it's pretty vast territory. And they used to joke that Charles V's empire was so vast that the sun never set on it. Now that's where that quote came from. Empire which the sun never sets. Not really the British originally. It was the Spanish Empire was called that. And the British kind of borrowed it later. But their empire was like all over the world. Philippines. On the other side of the world, parts of the Pacific, the Americas, most of the New World was conquered under him. And you can see Spain, southern Italy, Sardinia, northern Italy, the Netherlands, Austria, Bohemia, part of Hungary and Transylvania. So it was huge, this empire that he had. However, what happened, if you know about it, was, I'll get to it later, but he split it up. He split part of it with his brother. And that's why the whole Habsburgs end up into 2 main houses, which is one Spanish and one Austrian, that you get later. But he was famous for a lot of things, like, if you know about it, Charles, of course, was the main ruler that opposed the Reformation. We've talked about this already before, but remember, Charles was the one that issued that Edict of Worms to try to stop the spread of Martin Luther's religious ideas and his books being published throughout Germany. So that didn't work, and the Reformation took off. So he then issued the Peace of Augsburg, which he was more known for later, which created kind of like a peace agreement between the Lutherans and the Catholics, and that kind of prevented religious civil war from breaking out in his empire. But it kind of in the end caused later the 30 Years' War, the 1600s. So I guess it kind of didn't quite work out like they thought it would. But he was behind that, you know. Anyway, oh, and then he had a son who was very famous. I don't really, probably won't talk much about Philip right now, but Philip II, of course, was his main son, became the king of Spain later, and he was called Philip the Prudent, is what they called him. And Philip II was a famous ruler that was one of several peak, like maybe 2 or 3 rulers that peaked under the Spanish Empire period you may have heard of. That was called the Spanish Golden Age. Spanish Golden Age was a peak of culture and art and Spanish power in their empire, which was like late 16th, early 17th century. And Philip was probably the peak ruler of the Habsburg Empire, the Spanish. And he was the one that tried to invade England in 1588 with the attack of the Spanish Armada, and they got defeated, if you know about that. He's also the one that the Philippines is named after today. So I probably won't test much on him. Wouldn't worry about him right now. But when we get to talking about like the English and all that, like under Queen Elizabeth II, Queen Elizabeth I, we'll talk about that more later. Now, yeah, they would divide. You know, like the Habsburgs would divide into these 2 branches that you'll get later. And what happened was Charles V, I think it was in the 1550s, gave part of his empire to his younger brother, Ferdinand I, which I think was in 1558. Yeah, Ferdinand I, he was a Holy Roman Emperor, and basically it would split up. So all these areas that were in red were like the senior branch, you know, of Habsburg Empire. So you got Castile, Aragon, and also Portugal at one point. Southern Italy, Sardinia, Milan. See, like around the Netherlands and all that, of course, as well. And then, of course, the Austrian side of it, which is the junior branch that you'd have, of course, would be like Austria, Hungary, Bohemia, Transylvania, around Switzerland, parts of northern Italy too as well, later. So and I think Austria at one point later gets control of like the Netherlands, Austrian Netherlands, I think later that you got. So that's how it kind of divides. And part of the Austrian Habsburg states, you know, where some of it's in the Holy Roman Empire, like Bohemia, Austria, and then some it's not. You can see. So that's more about Charles V here. So yeah, Charles I, that's usually what they called him. So yeah, it actually might go back further than that. I forget the exact date on when it starts. You know, usually the Spanish, you know, the Habsburgs, but it's usually in the 1510s is about when it is. Yeah, he ruled over the most land since Charlemagne. That's pretty amazing. Charlemagne goes back to, you know, hundreds of years ago, you know, a long time ago. So lived about 800. So it's like, you know, 700 something years later. There's some more. Of course, yeah, the other thing, of course, that Philip did. Well, I don't think we're going to talk about that now, about Philip. But yeah, so he's the peak rule of the Spanish Golden Age. We'll get more into this later about Philip. I'll probably bring that slide up later, but I won't worry about that for now. So just skip that. So anyway, now we need to get into, of course, the Habsburgs Empire that are in Austria, the junior branch. Of course, there's no real official name of what they call like Austrian Empire is the, you know, the common name that they'll call the empire that kind of emerges in the 17th, 18th centuries from Habsburg territories that are controlled like in southern Germany at the time. And I guess they call it all kinds of things. Habsburg Empire is a common name. They called it the Austrian Empire was another name they called it. Some people call it Austro-Hungarian Empire. Becomes a popular name, I know, by the end of the 19th century as well. But this empire was a collection of states. It wasn't really one country. And a lot of these states were gotten through intermarriage, you know, people, different nobility of the Habsburgs controlling vast amounts of territory in the region. And at first they only had like this area here, but it would expand southward into Hungary, Transylvania, in what was really territory that was controlled by the Ottoman Empire and the Turks that were in part of Eastern Europe at the time. And part of why the Austrian Empire will expand will be because of the decline of the Ottoman Empire, and the fact that Austria-Hungary becomes more modernized as an actual state compared to them. Most, of course, people talk about the ruler of Emperor Leopold I. He was the most famous ruler of the Habsburgs in the 1600s, 17th century. You see it there. Of course, if you know much about Leopold, he was the longest reigning Habsburg ruler, especially the Austrians, who reigned about close to 46 years or so. And he was a major rival to Bourbon France. He was also a major rival to the Ottoman Empire to the east as well. And he's known for a lot of things. One thing he's famous for is expanding the Habsburg Empire around Austria with various wars that he fought in. His most famous series of wars he fought in, at least in that region, was the Great Turkish War, which has got all kinds of names. I think the other name they called it was the Habsburg-Ottoman War. That was mostly fought in the 1680s and 1690s. This was a war where the Ottoman Empire actually invaded the Austrian Empire. It actually laid siege to what is Vienna in 1683. And so what it forced Leopold to do, forced him to form an alliance, which I guess I'll mention about, that was created against the Turks. That was called the Holy League. Holy League was this alliance of Christian states in Europe that opposed the Muslim power of the Ottoman Empire, the Turks, and included like Poland was in it, Russia joined it, Holy Roman Empire was in it, a bunch of other states. And premier rulers like Peter the Great or Peter the First sent forces to help out, Leopold. And then also there was a famous general and king, of course, in France. You may have heard of Jan Sobieski. He was a great general, of course, a king, and great cavalry general, Jan Sobieski. And he helped to kind of rally forces against the Turks, and they defeated the Turks and prevented them from really taking Vienna in 1683. Almost got destroyed, by them. And they had a treaty later. I think it's mentioned in the PowerPoint. Looks like it. It's called the Treaty of Karlowitz. I think it is right here. It's either spelled with a C or K, either one. And it was a treaty which basically gave the Habsburgs control of Hungary, like pretty much most of it. And so he became like the first king of Hungary, which became his title. He also took over Transylvania. You think of like Dracula and all that later down there before, but and also Slovenia. I know Slovenia, but he controlled that too as well. So that's an important war, the Great Turkish War. It kind of starts the beginning of the Ottoman Empire's decline, and they're not as powerful afterwards, and they'll keep declining until World War I and all that. Also, he was a rival to Louis XIV, and Leopold helped form alliances against France in various wars, like they had the War of the League of Augsburg, I think it was called, or Grand Alliance, the War of the Spanish Succession they had as well. They fought against Louis XIV, and so he kind of helped to keep Louis in check, and from taking over most of Europe, which I guess he could have if Germany wouldn't have been that powerful at the time. Still. Also, he and his relatives built eventually what became their summer palace called the Schönbrunn Palace, which is in Vienna, Austria. That became like the showcase and showiness of, like the palaces like, Louis XIV was building at Versailles as a whole. And Schönbrunn Palace was a palace which they had been constructing on for years, going back to, I want to say, the 16th century. They had been kind of working on like an early type of palace or mansion that was there. There was actually one called Katterberg that was there originally. I had a video I was going to show you, but for some reason it wouldn't there's a copyright claim on it, so I couldn't show you. But this palace started out as like some kind of hunting lodge. They think of some of the early Holy Roman Emperor type rulers of Austria, and then from there it expanded into like a palace, which was began like in the 1690s. And the name Schönbrunn is a German word that means beautiful well or beautiful spring. And it was because of a nearby artesian spring that's where they took water from, where they got the name from, Schönbrunn Palace. That's a pretty large palace. Of course, it's very famous in Vienna. It's one of the biggest tourist attractions. Of course, it's there now today. And it has how many rooms? 1,441 rooms in it, which I think only about maybe 40 you can actually look at. But it was a type of Baroque style architecture, which they called Rococo, which I think was influenced by Italian architecture. And it went through different forms. I know, like Maria Theresa transformed a lot of it, I know, on the interior, but the outside of the facade was actually altered by Franz Joseph I, who was emperor of Austrian Empire in the later part of the 19th century. And the interior is all fancy too, like Versailles, tapestries on the ceiling, chandeliers, marble, gold being used. So it's all the same showiness that you see at these other palaces, like Versailles. And that palace is famous for a lot of famous people coming there, like supposedly Beethoven and Mozart, came there and, showed their, music skills off. And I think Napoleon Bonaparte lived there for a while when he conquered Austria. I know that. But the longest guy that lived there residence-wise was Emperor Francis Joseph I, who lived there his whole life, 80-something years. He was the longest reigning ruler, I think, of the so-called Austrian Empire. They call it later. All right. So yeah, let me get into, I've got a few minutes left. I can talk about some of the rulers that they had that were part of it. I don't think I've been missing some there, am I? I think I've missed some here. There we are, of course. The other rulers real quickly. I can talk about one more I might have time for, I guess, for now, and I'll get to, but they had Charles VI. He's known as Emperor Charles VI. And Charles VI was considered the last, what they call a Habsburg direct descendant. I'll give you the dates on the Habsburg Empire, but the Habsburg Empire, I don't know the exact date on like when it begins is kind of debated about that. But it usually goes from Habsburgs, I think I've got the date on it right here, but it goes from 1440. It's usually the date. We're talking about the one end, of course, it's in Austria, but it goes from 1440 to 1780. And 1447 80s, these are the dates when they put the Habsburgs and their main dynasty, of course, that they have. We only had two left after that. You had Charles VI, of course, that you had. And then, of course, I'll get to later his daughter, which was Maria Theresa, that you had. Might be able to talk about her. I don't know if I have time to talk about her or not, but I'll try to. But Charles VI had this problem he had, if you know about it, during his reign. He lacked like a male heir. He had like 4 children. 2 of them died young. I think it was a boy and a girl. And then he had 2 daughters that he had, which were Maria Theresa, of course, you see up there on the bottom of that slide. He had another daughter named, what was the other daughter's name? Maria Anna. Yeah, Maria Anna. So basically, he issued this pragmatic sanction, which I'll give you the year on. It was in 1730. And what the pragmatic sanction did was it basically gave control of the Habsburg territories. It really took the Habsburg reign to a female heir. which, about the Habsburgs, they never really had there's really not been too many female heirs that would reign eventually, of course, which would be the only one that really was of the Austrian branch, of course, which was Maria Theresa. They had some on the other side, like I think Joanna the Mad. I don't know if she was like related. She was still kind of related back to, Ferdinand and Isabella, more like a Castilian. I don't know if she really counts. But anyway, so she was the only female ruler that would come in, Maria Theresa. And trying to think if I had a slide on her or not. I don't know if I did. I thought I had a picture of her somewhere. Oh, there she is, Maria Theresa. And she was the only female, ruler they had of that particular dynasty, House of Habsburg, they called it. She would reign until 1780. So that's about when the so-called House of Habsburg would come to an end overall. I'll get to it later. She marries this guy named Francis of Lorraine, Francis the First, they called him later. And because of that, that's going to lead to a new dynasty develop, I'll get to later, which is called Habsburg-Lorraine. And but she was the sovereign ruler of Austria, Hungary, Croatia, Bohemia, Mantua, Milan, Lodomeria, Galicia, Austrian Netherlands, Parma. So she ruled over a vast amount of territory. And she was like the Archduchess of Austria, the Queen of Hungary, etc. And she was also Holy Roman Empress, just in like name, not really title, because her husband was Holy Roman Emperor later. But she was really the one who had all the power overall. And she was born in 1717, Vienna, of course. She would go on to marry Francis Stephen, as they called him, or Francis of Lorraine, who, by the way, later went on to become Holy Roman Emperor of Germany in 1745. In fact, he was Holy Roman Emperor, her husband, 1745 to 1765. That's her husband right here, of course, Francis. But France was a figurehead. He didn't really have any real power, really. And she had all the power. And she controlled all the vast lands and all that overall. They were known for having a lot of children. I think I'll go into the children later about that. I don't know if I have time to do all that today, but they had 16 children. And the children were part of a dynasty, I told you, that was later called Habsburg-Lorraine, that they dubbed it, which will rule from like 1780 to 1918. It goes up to World War I. I'll get to it later. Some of the famous people that came out of that dynasty you may have heard of were Emperor Joseph II and also Marie Antoinette, who was later a queen of France. And she was one of the peak centralized monarchs that was controlled that region of the Habsburg Empire. Might have been one of the last ones. And she did help to modernize the empire. One thing about Maria Theresa, she was kind of seen as an enlightened despot, this kind of absolutist type monarch that believed in reforms, modernizing the state. That's something I'll talk more about later, enlightened despotism or enlightened absolutism. But a lot of the reforms, if you read about it, they say a lot of them were influenced heavily by her son, which I'll get to later, Joseph II. He was kind of radical for a rule at the time. German starts becoming the big language, but that'll mostly be because of Joseph. So that's probably enough today, lecture-wise. I'm going to probably, continue later talking more about the Habsburgs. I think what I'll do is I'll finish up the Habsburgs on Thursday's class, and then I'm going to move on to talk about Prussia, the rise of Prussia, and then I'll talk about the rise of Russia. I don't know if we'll finish or not. Might take us another day or two to finish, but I know on Tuesday I'll finish most of the lecture material for our upcoming first online exam that I'm still working on. I'm almost finished with it, by the way, the exam, just taking a while. Now, before y'all go, a few reminders. Oh, by the way, if you have any comments, questions, let me know right now, or let me know on my YouTube channel on this lecture or any other lecture that I've posted before. And but before you go, don't forget, we do have some upcoming assignments that are due. Don't forget, you got that Canvas quiz on exploration that's due tonight. I have moved it up 2 days, though. I'm going to leave it open for people that are late completing it, but I'll probably leave it open until Thursday this week. And then also the one on that Michael Wood documentary on the fall of Mexico and the Aztecs, Hernan Cortez. So get that one done too as well. And then don't forget, start turning in your vocab this week. First key terms. I need to try to get the other one up too, the second one, which I'll try to do this week sometime. And that's it for today. So pretty much, if you don't have any questions, that's it for today. Hope you all have a good week, the rest of the time with the other classes. And I will see you on Thursday. Okay? So y'all take care. I hope y'all are staying safe out there. I guess we got lucky with those hurricanes, huh? So they didn't come this way, but looks like it's going towards like Mississippi, Alabama. So y'all take care. Have a great day.